Welcome to Background Elements. In this section, I'm going to go over a few common items or subject matter that you can often find in the backgrounds of artwork. And I'm going to show how I translate them from a photo into something that can be used in an illustration. So when it comes to flowers, they're a rather complex looking shape, but as we went over in the last lesson, it's all about finding what kind of shapes make up an object that you want to portray. So right now I'm focused on getting the silhouette of the flower down. And to be honest, I don't have to follow the reference exactly. I'll do one example of following it more closely and then some examples of stylizing it. So if I'm going to follow it closely, I'm going to figure out the light and the dark. I'm just looking at roughly these little windy shapes of light and depicting them in the same manner that I see. I'm finding all the parts that have stronger lighting on them and simplifying away the rest. This section is so part of it's in the light and part of it is in the shadow. I'm going to use a different color. This part is in the shadow and these are in the light, but it's at an angle where the texture of the petal is actually getting caught. So when it comes to things like this, you can decide how you want it to look. You don't have to try to follow it exactly. Especially if you're going to simplify a little bit, you can just choose, oh, do you want this whole petal in the light? Does that look better? Or do you want a whole petal in the darkness? Getting to this point is reliant on a combination of skills, including color picking, observation, and understanding of shapes and form. The better you get at these skills, the easier this process will become. I want to select the red parts so that I can smooth it out a little bit, because the petal texture is quite soft. Paying attention to the hue shifts and the slight value shifts within the darkness of the petal. So you can see that the light is kind of shining through the petal. Light is shining through the petal and it creates this saturated color. This happens as well if you put your hand up to a light. Your hand becomes almost slightly see-through looking and you get this warm color coming through it. Already looking a lot better. Now I'm just focusing on getting in some of those little details of the edge of each petal and fixing up some of the shapes that were rough. At this point, if I re-evaluate the proportions, I can see that the center of the flower is not exactly following the reference, because it's over here, and if you just think about it, if you think about it relative to the edges, it's slightly going to the right compared to in this image. So I can fix it with Liquify, but to be honest, you could also just leave it. I think that it is totally possible as a flower, because flowers are so organic to begin with. It's difficult for someone to see this and view it as a mistake, because they don't know what the original looked like, and maybe the flower just grew this way. Most of the structure of the flower is still representative of an actual flower. But since we want this one to follow the reference a bit more, I'm going to adjust it a little bit using the liquify tool. So yeah, to finish this off, you can just keep adding little details all across the flower. Hint at the texture, subtle texture that's in the light. You can tell that there's a subtle hue shift as well. It's getting yellower towards the center, so you can put that in too. We can use the same technique from before and use select color gamut so that we only get the parts in the light. And then airbrush, and airbrush in that slight yellow hue from the center outwards. If we want to go for a more stylized interpretation of this flower, you can break down the flower into again the most defining attributes. So the types of shape that it casts, I'm going to use mostly just these two colors for now, and break the entire shape into just these two. This is why Notan studies are quite helpful, because they are the ultimate simplification. Gets you used to that extreme. And I'm gonna actually add some line art, but just some slight line art around the edges. And you can still tell that this is a flower. It helps if you add some context, for example, the leaves underneath it. So even though this flower here, this one on top, took about less than half the time it took to paint this one, it still conveys the same information. Almost the same. Obviously, this one conveys a lot more detail. But in terms of conveying the existence of a rose, this one does just as well, despite taking much less time. And that is completed just by being able to break down the rose into the main types of shapes that come from it. I like to focus on shapes and form, but you can also define flowers or anything really through line. But the important thing with line is because since generally you have less to work with when it comes to communicating the existence of your subject matter and what kind of features it has, you need to make your line art as expressive as possible for it to be interesting and to convey the information you want to send to the viewer. When it comes to line art, not only do I want to convey the edges that exist on the subject matter, I also want to convey the ambient occlusion along with aesthetic appeal and depth. And this is why I will have a lot of variation in the line width of the line art. Because compare this to if I just drew with one line width. Which one looks more interesting and which one conveys more information about the subject matter? When it comes to depth, if you compare this image And this image, when they had the same line width, it appears that the circle is in front, yes, but it could be slapped right on top of the square. Whereas in this image, in this layout, the thicker line width implies depth between the circle and the square. But to be honest, both interpretations are valid. They just communicate different pieces of information to the viewer, and that's something you just need to be aware of, so that you have full control over the decisions made in your artwork. By understanding what effect they will have on the viewer. Just finish filling these in and adding some secondary color to them. So for the next part, I wanted to go over how to break down a rather complicated environmental scene. As you can see, there's many trees, many leaves, a stone path, dirt covered in leaves and roots, along with a big torii gate in the middle and stone sculptures around the sides. And then to top all of that off, there is dappled lighting. So how do you approach something like this? Well, I would take away all the foreground elements and try to simplify the background first. So in the foreground, we have a lot of detail and things going on which we can layer on top afterwards. So let's get in the background first. The background will attract less attention and therefore it won't need to be as clean and perfect. Going to try to get color of the trees roughly, filling it in, and the color of the ground. I think it's actually a little greener. And yeah, I think that is a good starting point. I'm going to blend them together a little bit to give it a bit softer feeling. And then start layering in details from the background forward. So if we simplify the trees, for example, the trees over here, we can break them down into kind of their long trunks and bits of leaves and branches coming out. Now, I would probably go at this with a brush just to get the textures of the leaves in, but if we're going to do it manually, which is also possible, I would go about it like this. I think I would make a separate layer, and I'm going to observe the shape, the patterns a little bit, and then try to draw some in. The branches are easier if I just use a pen. And I'm going to copy paste it. So copy paste it, flip it, just to get that texture over and over. This is essentially like using a brush, but very manually. So you can grab the select tool, move it around, make it look a little more natural, form other shapes, which you can then paste around again. And I'm going to paste this whole thing over here as well, but make it a little smaller. Grab these, kind of chuck it in the background. Going to add in some more variety of tree trunks, since not all of them are that straight. And I'm just utilizing the same skill over and over of observing shapes, simplifying them, and reapplying it. What type of shape is needed in my brush strokes for someone to see this and view it, interpret it correctly to how I want them to. Or in other words, how do I make someone see this and see a tree? See a forest? What types of shapes are needed? There's a bit of a slope or perspective going on at the bottom, so it's important that the bottom of the trunks are kind of going up, if you notice what I mean. They're rising a little bit as we go further back. Just an important detail to create depth. For these bright ones, I'm actually going to merge them down. Merge them all down and copy paste it. Make it smaller and stick it in the back. Because the trees in this corner are a bit less bright, I'm going to airbrush in a darker color for them so that they don't stand out as much. And for these ones, since they're in the sunlight, they also have some cast shadow. So I'm going to try to apply some shadow first by airbrushing the bottom, just for that natural kind of gradient lighting that you might expect when the lighting is coming from above. And then I'm going to go in with the layer opacity locked. I'm going to go in and paint in some of that shadow. Since it's dappled, I'm trying to manually create that dapple effect with my pen strokes, but you could also approach this again with a brush, and it might be a little easier. A textured brush. I would spend more time on this usually, but I want to get through this rather quickly. So I'm going to go on to the foreground trees. Well, not exactly foreground, but the trees that are closer to the front. Going to start with this darker color and just fill in the shapes of the trunk once again. Once I have the body of the tree down, I'm going to do the same process as I did for the back trees and start creating some of these leaf shapes. So I'm going to bundle them together and look at the shape of each bundle of leaves rather than each individual leaf by itself. The edge of the bundle will imply the existence of singular leaves without me having to draw each one by one. Same as before, I'm going to copy paste some of them around. So that I can achieve some of these shapes a little faster. But I'm also going to paint some in at the same time, so to keep the organicness of the composition. To keep it looking natural. Now that I have all these shapes down for the bundles of leaves, I'm going to give them some shading because they have this dappled light effect on them. After I merge all of them together, all the leaves, and I'm just going to paint this in. I want it a bit darker. And again, giving it that dappled look. I'll also make a new layer and paint in some more of these leaf shapes, or to be honest, I might just copy paste some of these shapes and paste it behind the trunks as well, just to give it some more volume. Since the leaves are going to be both in front and behind of the trunks. And just to make it more obvious that they're behind the trunks, I'm going to color in them a little darker, because most of the light of these trees are the ones in front. So now I'm going to add the very light leaves. I'm going to use another color for them. And once again, dapple them in. Or alternatively, I can also paste a bunch of leaves and clip it to the layer below, and then fill it in with the lighter color, and then erase. Erase from this layer to remove what I don't want. Again, the same effect can be achieved if you have a nice brush for this as well. But I'm going to show you how to do it manually, because I think it's easier to understand how to do things manually and then apply the brush than the other way around. I'm noticing that they have a bit of a glowy effect too, so I'm just going to grab a warm color and airbrush in around some of these glowing leaves. And here you can see the effect that is achieved. And changing the hue a little bit to make the colors have a bit more variety, giving it a warm glow instead of a green glow. I'm going to move on to depicting the Torii Gate, and I'm going to use straight lines for this by holding down Shift and clicking as I create the lines I need for the shape of the pole. And I'm going to Control T, transform this just a little bit, and copy paste it. Right click, flip horizontal for the other side. Now that I'm looking at it again, I think I've made it a little too tall. I'm going to merge the two, Control T again, drag it down, and scale the top side inwards a little bit. And now draw another. I'm going to use a slightly pinker color. Draw another rectangular shape for the wood that's going across. It's going to look something like this. Doesn't need to be perfect. It's probably not perfect in reality, but it just needs to be inorganic looking enough. I'm going to put this on an extra layer actually beneath these so that I can adjust it easily if needed. make it slightly smaller and a little bit longer. Actually, I think these can be slightly closer together instead. I'm just eyeing out the proportions as I do this so that I can keep it roughly the same size as what I see in the reference. I'm going to copy paste this one again onto a new layer, copy paste, Control T, move it up, and now I'm going to do that again one more time and extend it a little bit to create the black part on top. I'm going to lock opacity with this button and fill it in with a darker color. Now Control T again, transform it until you're happy with the shape. And I've noticed that it comes in a little bit, there's a slight curve, so I'm just going to erase that. And I'm going to apply, after making it slightly bigger, I'm going to apply a shadow going across by once again holding Shift to create a straight line. Now for the poles of the gate, I'm going to make a new layer, clip it, and add some lighting. So actually, before I add the lighting, I'm going to add just a little bit of orange to the bottom of the gate. I think that it is the result of the sun shining onto the red and making it fade a little bit. I think this just adds a little bit of realism to the colors of the torii gate. And now back to the lighting. Just going to paint that in. Starts off a little more orange and then it goes kind of pink as it climbs up. And it has this kind of leaf texture going down it, with a particularly bright area around here, and some more on the other side as well. Now I'm going to make these fence things as well, just borrowing the same color as the torii gate, and just going to block in some more rectangles using the same method as before. Oh, make sure you have a color selected and then block in a rectangle, fill it in, get it to the right size. You can hold Control to move one of these, I don't know what you call them, these points of the transform tool on its own, because normally if you don't hold it, it's going to keep a number of the other ones the same, but if you hold Control, you can move it anywhere. Once I have it in place, going to copy paste it, move it across, and do that again for the last one. And then once more for the part that goes across. And actually I'm going to put this on a different layer So I'm going to merge the three going across. Merge these three, and then paste this long one underneath it. Drag out the top of the fence, place it into position, crop out what's not needed, and duplicate it again to put on the bottom of the fence. And I'm going to merge the two horizontal ones together. They are not the correct color, so let me just borrow the color from the torii gate. Airbrush in some pinks over here, and then select the horizontal fence pieces and add some of that grimy texture onto it. I think I'm going to use a transparent brush just because I don't want the green to be so strong. Where is my, there it is, transparent brush. Make it a little darker so that it stands out from the values behind it. And now I'm going to grab this fence and copy paste it onto the other side. Flip it and paste it there. Now we basically have the torii gates in place. Going to continue detailing it a little bit, adding some darker red hues to these pinks. And some slight lighting. Also going to merge the two pinks that are going across horizontally together, which also happens to be the fence, but doesn't really matter since they're kind of far apart. So adding in a bit more subtle lighting. And there we go. Just about have it. There's more that I could do, but I'm going to move on now. Let's add some rock texture. So I think the way that I want to go about the rock texture is I'm going to draw in those little cracks. Draw in the darker areas of. So I think the way that I'll go about the rocks in front are to draw in the cracks and imply the texture. I feel like fitting in the entirety of this image for this lesson was a bit ambitious. I'm going to start working on getting the shape of these sculptures in. Well, inorganic shapes, you just need to make sure that they look inorganic. You need to keep the straight edges straight and clean. Or not clean, just identifiable. And honestly, I'm just going to copy paste this a whole bunch of times. Since they're all roughly the same shape. So it makes for a good base to use. I'm gonna put them all in the same folder and just mask them to the shape of the background by applying a mask to the folder. And now they won't come out the side. I'm debating what the easiest way to get all these sculptures out onto the composition would be. I think I'm going to apply some color first. Give it a little bit of texture. And then add the white inner area. And some basic shading. So my issue is that they're all at different perspectives. So I'm just going to leave the shading rather vague so that I can adjust them if I feel the need. Okay. I'm gonna copy paste this a whole bunch of times. Oh, let me merge down this white panel. Then copy paste it into every position. Once I have all the ones that I want to include on the composition, I'm going to group them into a folder. And once I have them grouped, I'm going to select the background layer with Control click and apply it as a mask so that they don't come out the edges. Adding some volume to these shapes. I do this by making it clear that you can see these two faces of this cubic structure. Also going to add some lighting. And I choose my colors just by observing what color is this, and I'm using it to represent what on this reference, and what would the light color be in relationship to that first color. And my thoughts are, well, the value is lighter and it's warmer and maybe a little saturated too. And, you know, once you apply it, if it looks wrong, then just pick again. Keep picking until it looks correct or to your satisfaction. Actually, I might put this, oh no, this is already on a separate layer, so I'm going to change it to add and reduce the saturation a little bit because I want it to affect this shadow area too. In that case, I want the color to be warmer for sure. Because I'm adjusting for the effect of the add layer. Actually, I'm gonna just apply this layer to the folder instead so that it will show up on all of these sculptures. I'm going to add the branch shadow on the layer beneath just by drawing in the shapes. And then I think to finish this off, I'm going to add some more color to the steps. Make it a little darker. Adding in that texture of the rock. along with the lighting. I'm gonna use the add layer once again for the lighting. Going to do a dappled effect to simulate the branches. Along with putting some in the background, because we can see there's a lot of dappled effects on the ground behind as well. Although I need to move this to a lower layer so that it doesn't go in front of the trees. To be honest, there's a lot more that I would want to do to it. I think the main thing that just needs a bit of fixing up before I can call it acceptable is making the sculptures a bit darker. All right, I will call this good enough. I think I could keep working on it, but for the demonstration, I think I have gone through pretty much how to break down a difficult environment like this and have it all come together. I hope that was helpful, and I'm sorry that we didn't have enough time to get to this one, but I'll see if I can do something for the next lessons. Alright, that'll be it. There's no exercise for this lesson, but I hope you enjoyed it and found it helpful. I will see you guys in the next one.